If you've struggled with your weight all your life, if you've tried every diet under the sun, then this is for you. No gimmicks, no drugs, no money, just the latest science, pure and simple. The two men you're about to meet both lost their fathers to diabetes. They were both headed the same way, but they broke the cycle. Professor Tim Noakes, Bernie Diamond. These next 30 minutes are your game changer. Break the cycle.
A strange thing seems to have been happening over the last 30 or 40 years. On the one hand, the medical profession has been telling us to eat a heart-healthy, low-fat diet, and by all accounts, we've been pretty compliant. But on the other, we're getting fatter and fatter. A scientist who says he has the answers is Professor Tim Noakes, and yet the science that he's pointing to is, well, not exactly endearing you to the establishment, is it, Tim?
Not at all.
So is that a reasonable summary? Are we indeed getting fatter and fatter?
Oh, absolutely. And the diabetes rates are shooting through the roof in Australia, in America, in South Africa, everywhere.
Why is that? I mean, it seems to make sense. Eat less fat, and you won't put on weight, and yet we are getting fatter and fatter.
So that's the old calories in, calories out model, which suggests that all calories are equal, whether they come from fat or carbohydrate. The problem is, and we've known this since the 1950s, carbohydrates drive hunger. And the more carbohydrates you eat, the more calories you will ingest. And the US government brought out the guidelines in 1977. They said we must eat less fat and more carbohydrates, and the calorie consumption just shot up and the obesity rate started there. You can just go back to 1977 and it was predictable, and exactly what has happened is we knew it was going to happen.
But it kind of seems logical. Eat grain, get lots of fiber into your body because that's good and that's healthy. And I remember my mother in German used to say, Fett macht fett. Fat makes you fat, right? And there is such an elegant simplicity around that equation. Talk to us about these calories not being equal, because the law of thermodynamics says something in, something out. If you exceed what comes in against what comes out, you are going to put on weight.
Yeah, the key is what they do to the brain. So we eat in response to what the apostat in the brain is telling us to do. And the apostat is so well designed that it can keep your weight to within a few kilograms, or a few grams, I should say, in a year. But once the apostat is taken over by sugary drinks and sugary foods and high carbohydrate diets, it gets hijacked. And then it makes you perpetually hungry. And then you continue to eat calories and you put on weight. So the key, as you know, is you've got to treat hunger. It's hunger that is driving the obesity. And what's driving hunger is carbohydrates and sugar. And we don't recognize that. And so the dietitians will say, well, you can eat sugar in moderation. That's like telling an alcoholic, you can drink alcohol in moderation. You can't. You can't smoke in moderation. It's all or none. And that's the tragedy. People don't understand it. And people won't accept that sugar is the most addictive drug on this planet.
Well, it's as addictive as cocaine, right?
Absolutely. And more difficult to get off probably than cocaine.
It's a hard message because we reward people with sugar. We reward children with sugar. We give them a lolly when they've done well.
And the industry realized that, and they realized when the fat was taken out of the diet, they realized, but you're taking all the taste out of food.
Okay, let's just roll back a little bit. How does a young Tim Noakes get interested in what other people put in their mouths? Because, I mean, you're a lean, mean fighting machine, right? So, I mean, you're a skinny guy. You run marathons, right?
Well, I did until I got too old. I'm now 70, so that's... Right. And I can lift my weight, by the way, more than my weight, so I'm in good shape. But so I was a marathon runner, and I grew up exactly when carbohydrates came in. In the 1970s, we were told that there's only one thing that determines your performance. It's how much carbohydrates you have in your muscles. And that is nonsense. But for 33 years, I promoted that, and I wrote a book called Law of Running, in which it says there, carbohydrates are essential and good for your health.
Now, I've famously seen you tearing the chapter out of that book.
That's right.
It takes a lot for a scientist to do a U-turn, to admit I was wrong. What brought you to that point? Why did you get there?
Well, it happened a night I'd written another book called Waterlogged, in which I understood how industry influenced runners to overdrink, and with catastrophic consequences in some cases. And I sent the book off the one evening, and my brain said to me that night, you must get up tomorrow morning and you must run, and you must not stop running for the rest of your life, because I hadn't been running enough while I was writing this book. And I went out and ran, and I had a dreadful run, and I came home, and would you believe it, there was an email in my email inbox saying lose 6 kilograms in 6 weeks, and with the new Atkins for the New You, the book. And I said, this is ridiculous. This is terrible. Atkins was trying to kill us with all the saturated fat. So, but I knew the 3 authors, and I had respect for them, so I went and bought the book. I was so angry. I drove there, and I read the book, and in 2 hours I said, oh my gosh, I got it wrong. 150 studies proving the benefit of the low-carbohydrate diet.
Now, Atkins was kind of considered to be a heretic back in the day.
Yeah.
We didn't quite maybe know why he got it right, but he did get it right.
He did get it right because he was overweight, and he worked out that if he was in ketosis, it would take away his hunger.
So just hang on a minute, just explain this whole ketosis thing.
Sure.
What does that mean?
So ketosis is a natural response to restriction of carbohydrate or restriction of calories, and it's what keeps us alive when we haven't got food. And
Which used to be the case, right? There were times when there was no supermarket 24/7, right?
That's
so there
right.
used to be times when people couldn't eat.
Correct. And we developed this technique, or developing this ketosis. So it's a fantastic survival technique for humans.
Yeah.
What it also does is it takes away your hunger. And Atkins realized this. He looked through the literature and he said, how can I take away my hunger? And it said, if you're in ketosis, and then he said, well, how do I get in ketosis? And it was a low-carbohydrate diet. So he began the low-carbohydrate diet purely to take away his hunger. And that was what attracted to me to the Atkins diet, was the idea of that hunger. And I said, but that's impossible. When you reduce calories, you're just going to be hungry. And of course, it's not on this diet.
Well, that's what used to get me. I used to struggle with my weight. I used to be 25 kilograms bigger than what I am now. I'm a pretty disciplined guy, ex-military guy,
Exactly.
I'm type A, achievement-oriented person, but I could never keep the weight off because I was always fighting my appetite. And ultimately, the appetite always won.
Yeah. So I converted on this diet, and within a week I'd lost 2 kilograms. So I said, well, he wasn't telling us for fake. Turns out it was true. Yeah. And then I discovered I had type 2 diabetes. So I got type 2 diabetes because my father and the whole family, we come from the north of England, and they were a very large, big family, and there were a number who had type 2 diabetes.
But you were never large or big, right?
Well, I was a few kilos heavier than I am now. Yeah, that's right. So, but I had insulin resistance, and that's the key. I've gone back on my own data when I was doing experiments on myself, and I discovered I had a fasting insulin of 30 units, which is 5 times normal.
Right.
We don't want a value above 6, and I was 30, so I was a waiting time bomb.
Okay, so what is the role of insulin in our body? Because insulin seems to be the main thing.
Well, insulin doesn't do what you're taught. Insulin doesn't drive glucose into cells. Insulin switches off glucagon, which is the hormone which drives glucose production. So it's getting a little complex.
Yeah.
So I have a problem. My insulin does not act on my glucagon, and I have too much glucagon circulating, and that causes my liver to pour out glucose. And in the consequence, I try to raise the insulin to get it down, and the insulin then damages the body. We're not designed to have high insulin levels.
And what drives insulin in a normal, healthy person?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's only one thing really, that's carbohydrates. Protein to a little effect, but mainly carbohydrates. So every time you eat carbohydrates, that apple that you eat spikes your glucose and it spikes your insulin. And it's those repeated spikes of insulin that cause most of the chronic diseases. 85% of the chronic diseases are nutritionally based. We're talking about heart disease, hypertension, gout, osteoporosis, osteoarthritis.
So you're an academic, but how much training does the average doctor get in their medical degree on what we eat, on nutrition?
Nothing. Essentially nothing. Yeah.
That's mind-boggling.
The last thing the doctor will ask you is, what are you eating?
Yeah.
And whereas we know that, for example, take hypertension. Hypertension can be reversed if you cut sugar and carbohydrates.
Right.
But I'll bet that any hypertensives who are watching this show, they were never asked, what are you eating? Instead, they're given pills. So you see, our problem is the following. 85% of chronic disease is nutritionally based. How do we treat it? We treat it with drugs. And we have different drugs for different conditions. But They're all the same disease. And so the modern medicine is going to say, okay, it's nutritionally based. We must sort out the nutrition and get rid of the pharmaceuticals. But that's never going to happen for obvious reasons.
Talk to me about those obvious reasons.
Well, the obvious reasons are what happened to me, you see, because I started saying
You should be careful with Twitter accounts.
That's right.
Tell us that story. Tell us about the tweet and what ultimately happened to you.
Well, I wrote a book called The Real Meal Revolution, which sold 250,000 copies in South Africa, and it completely changed the framework of nutrition in this country. All of a sudden, people were reading this book. We had a green list. These are the foods you can eat, and people ate that food and they lost weight. And they said, but why did a dietitian never tell me this? They always told me, measure your calories in and calories out and exercise more. But he said, on this, it's simple. You don't even have to exercise and you can lose weight. So people went to the dietitians and said, listen, this is what Noakes says and this is what you say. What's right? And they said, well, Noakes is definitely not right. We're right. You see, but they said, but I was on your diet for 20 years and I just put on weight. But I went on this diet in 2 weeks, I'd lost substantial amounts of weight. So the dietitians decided they had to shut me up. And the pharmaceutical industry, had already got unhappy with me because I was saying that statin drugs are not particularly helpful.
Which is what the research says, right?
Yeah, it absolutely says that. It absolutely says that. It says 1 in 100 people benefit from it, but you're never told that. 1 in 100% people with heart disease benefit from these drugs.
And if you haven't had heart disease, what's the benefit of a statin?
If you haven't, well, it's probably 1 in 1,000 or even less. And if you're a woman, it's probably 1 in 10,000 or something. Yeah.
All right, so we're digressing. Yeah. back to your saga with a dietitian.
So the head of dietetics in South Africa got in touch with the Health Professional Council because I'm a doctor. I'm aligned with the health profession. I'm registered, and she said we've got to take this guy out. And they said, oh, that's no problem. We'll organise that. And they started a malicious prosecution against me.
Which went for how many years?
For 4.5 years.
Oh, happy days.
So I was in court for 28 days. Wow. And it was malicious. And the problem is we proved it was malicious. We proved that there was collusion between the two bodies.
And what was the finding of the, because it was the medical review board, right? These were your governing body, presumably ethical. What did they find?
They found that I was completely innocent on all charges. And that what I was saying, see, what I said was that a lady asks a question, but she asked a we question. And if you answer a we question, there's no doctor-patient relationship.
Right.
And we established right from the word go. If there's no doctor-patient relationship, I can essentially say pretty much what I like. But they claimed I had a doctor-patient relationship and I'd failed the lady. And we proved that was not the case. And anyway, the advice I gave, which was to wean the baby onto low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet, is exactly what the dietary guidelines are across the world.
So were you let off on a technicality? Because the science was on trial too, right? Yeah. It wasn't just Tim Noakes. Yeah, the science was on trial. You're saying low-carb, high-fat. They're saying that's terrible. Yeah. So what was the finding about the science that you're quoting?
They said that so we presented 6,000 pages of documentation, and we gave evidence for 12 days. And I was personally on the stand for 9 days, including 3.5 days cross-examination. That's never happened in medicine. And at the end of the day, they said the advice you gave was evidence-based and it was not unconventional. And then, so they could not find me. And then there was no doctor-patient relationship and all these things.
So to the layperson on the street, the idea that low carbohydrate, high fat seems like a heresy because almost all my life I've been told, my doctors have told me 1 egg a week, no dairy products. It seems heretical. How do you come up with it? How do you justify this heretical position to the average human being like me?
Well, the average human being up to 1965 was eating that diet. The diet was 45% fat and 35% carbohydrate. That was the diet. And then the American Heart Association and the American Department of Agriculture comes along and says you've got to reverse that. You've got to put the carbohydrate at 55 to 65% and fat down to 30%. And that's when we got the switch, and that's when we drove the obesity, diabetes. So we only have to go back to 1965 to see when people were lean. I matriculated in 1966. All the kids that we were around were all lean.
Yeah.
And they were healthy. But today, you just look around and it's a different pattern altogether.
Well, my grandfather was born in 1989. And I don't look that old, but that was... and I remember they used to eat a lot of fat.
Yeah, that's right.
A lot of fat.
Yeah.
And there was no heart disease back in the early 1900s, right?
No.
Or diabetes. It strikes me that people don't look at historical trends and say, why is this happening? We imagine that history began last Thursday,
exactly.
right? Rather than saying, why is this happening?
Yeah.
Well, you're saying carbohydrates.
Well, that's the evidence, and we've got now enough clinical trials to show that carbohydrates are driving obesity.
So how come the experts can't agree? I mean, eggs were bad, eggs are good again, butter was bad, butter's good again, vegetable oils. Why can't we just look at the science? Am I being too naive? Why can't we just look at the science and say, this is what the science says? Why can't you guys agree?
Oh, I think there are two reasons. Firstly, the profession has ego, and so, I mean, I know one of my colleagues who gives bad advice. He's been giving the bad advice for 20 years. He's one of the drivers of the case against me from my university because he's giving advice that is wrong and he's harming patients and he won't admit it. So what do? You shoot the messenger, you shoot Noakes. Rather than change his mind and help patients, you just shoot Noakes. So that's the tendency amongst the profession. But the industry, there's no way that they're going to support going to eat real foods.
Why not?
Because processed foods are so valuable and so produce such an income for the income stream for 10 companies. There are 10 companies that have made us fat, and they know it because they worked out that the more sugar they put in their processed foods, the more they would addict us, the more we would eat, the fatter we would get, etc. They know it.
So are you saying these are the tobacco companies of today?
Absolutely, and some of them are tobacco companies that, of course, have invested into food.
Okay, Tim, what would you say to the person who's watching, who's been struggling with their weight all their lives, who's kind of teetering on the edge of this? Where should they go with that?
I'd say it's easy. We've just got to control your hunger. That's the key. And once we control your hunger, you get rid of your desire to eat the bad foods. So if you're eating processed food, the sugar will drive you to eat again within 3 hours. That's the key. So you get up in the morning and you have your healthy muesli or cornflakes, cereals, and then you add skim milk and you add sugar and you have banana, which is toxic carbohydrate. It's just loaded with carbohydrate.
Really?
Yeah. Bananas is one of the most carbohydrate.
You can understand someone's watching this today thinking that Noakes must be crazy,
Exactly.
right? Bananas!
Exactly. There's one Australian who eats only bananas, and he has a couple of video clips on me, and he doesn't like it. So,
Those Australians, I don't know.
yeah. So you eat the carbohydrates, and 3 hours later you're hungry. Whereas we who've had this high-fat breakfast that we had this morning, we're not going to be hungry till this evening, and that's the way it is.
It's just it was just, to me, giving up sugar, which I've done, and I eat a high-fat, low-carb diet. The giving up sugar thing was not easy for the first few weeks. Talk us through that, because it is not easy.
Yeah, it's a highly addictive product, and it took me 14 months to get off sugar, adding to coffee. But the processed foods, you've got to understand, all processed foods are full of sugar.
So when you go shopping in the supermarket, where in the supermarket do you shop?
Well, I don't really shop in the supermarkets. Okay. I shop in the butchery.
Okay.
So, but however, of course, you're right. We go and eat. We get the meat and the vegetables, and that's it. And that's, of course, on the outsides of the...
And when you look at the inside aisles of a supermarket, they are cram-packed full with manufactured food.
Yeah, and those are the killers. And
barbecue sauce, 42% sugar.
That's correct.
Ketchup, tomato sauce, 31%
well,
sugar.
you know, the world's catching up because the value of Heinz dropped by 40%. The share market price dropped 40%.
Wow.
Because people have realized sugar. And Coca-Cola is in real distress. People don't yet know it because they're manufacturing, they're keeping the share price up. But they're in real trouble because the sales have dropped dramatically.
Which is a good news if we start consuming less sugar. The obvious question around this low carbohydrate, high fat is cholesterol, right? We've all been told cholesterol is bad, and are you causing people to have heart attacks?
Well, firstly, cholesterol doesn't exist in the bloodstream as such. And that's so how can it be?
Hang on. I have blood tests and they tell me my HDL and LDL, right?
Yeah, no, but they don't, it's not, so cholesterol is not water soluble. It's a fat, and it has to be surrounded by protein for it to be soluble in blood. And that becomes a lipoprotein. And some lipoproteins have more cholesterol in them and in others. And we don't always know exactly what those lipoprotein functions are. They are to transport cholesterol around the body. It's not just to kill you. That's the problem. So what happened was that in 1967, an American scientist said, listen, if we look at the lipoproteins, these are the people who are getting heart attacks. And we've got to address these lipoprotein profiles. And then the American Heart Association said, yeah, but that doesn't make sense because there's only 4 machines in the whole of America that can measure lipoproteins. So let's simplify. Let's just call it cholesterol. Let's make everyone scared of cholesterol. And so then what next happens is we get something to lower cholesterol. So we get the statin drugs. And people forget that when you go on a diet, a high-fat diet, yes, indeed, your total cholesterol may go up, but there are 25 other things that improve.
Okay.
And that one may go up, but what does it mean? We really don't understand. So cholesterol, the link between cholesterol and heart disease has never been proven. Never been proven. It is assumed.
Is it true, and I've read this, but I'm no doctor,
Yeah.
is it true that as many people with normal cholesterol have heart attacks as with high cholesterol?
Yeah, the majority of people with heart disease have normal cholesterol. But if we go and check them properly, we'll find 80% of diabetes. Diabetes is the cause of heart disease. And we're slowly beginning to realize this. Because what's happened is we have put people on the low-fat diet, and diabetes has started. And diabetes causes disseminated arterial disease, as you know from your father's experience and my father's experience. So then we start cutting limbs off. Now, what caused that? It's arterial disease. So here we have the low-fat diet that is meant to prevent arterial disease is causing arterial disease. And do you think there's one cardiologist in the world who says, my gosh, we got it wrong, and we're killing people from diabetes? Not at all. Not a word.
Diabetes is a horrendous disease. I mean, I watched my dad die of it, and literally his body started to rot around him.
Exactly.
We talk about diabetes as though, oh, well,
Yeah,
it's just
yeah,
diabetes.
yeah.
But it's a horrendous thing.
Yeah, so now I'm diabetes in remission.
Okay.
So I get type 2 diabetes. And my dad dies 10 years after the diagnosis.
Yeah.
And he's treated conventionally. So I've got 10 years to sort out the problem. And I put it into remission by going on this very extremely low carbohydrate diet and doing a few other things, lots of exercise and so on. But that's the point. You have 10 years before you lose your first limb. And if you don't address it, you will die and you will become more and more sick, as you've explained.
You use that word extremely.
Yeah.
Some would say that you are being extreme.
Yeah.
I mean, the Irish have been eating potatoes for generations, right?
Yeah.
In fact, it's what got them through the famine.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember my grandparents would eat bread and make a cake and so on. Is it so extreme to cut your carbohydrates so low?
Yeah, that's a great question. You see, the problem is that when the Irish were eating a lot of potatoes, they weren't eating sugar, and they probably weren't eating vegetable oils, and they probably weren't eating flour. But when you combine those three and you start from a young age, then the children become progressively more insulin resistant and they can't tolerate carbohydrates at some time in their lives. And once you get to my stage, 60, with diabetes, I've run out of options and I have to be extreme. If I had eaten a high-fat diet from day one, I would never have got diabetes, and I could eat more carbohydrates. I could eat 100 grams a day. Not 200 or 300, but 100 grams, and it wouldn't be as extreme.
How many grams of carbohydrates does the average person eat these days?
Okay, well, between 300 and 400 grams a day.
Wow.
Yeah, at least. And if you're cycling a Tour de France, it could be 1 kilogram a day.
Wow.
I mean, they've changed that. But in the 80s, when we were telling people to eat lots of carbohydrate, a world-class athlete in an endurance event would have been eating 1 kilogram of carbohydrate a day. And how they didn't get diabetes so quickly, because that load on your pancreas and insulin secretion is just unbelievable.
Okay, Tim, what would you say to the person who's watching, who's been struggling with their weight all their lives, who's kind of teetering on the edge of this? Where should they go with that?
I think you have to ask, how healthy are you? And what's your mood like? And are you mildly depressed? And do you find it difficult to exercise? And all those questions. Are you happy with it? Have you got lots of energy? Do you get up in the morning full of energy? And can you exercise vigorously? And I couldn't. That had all gone. I was still quite enthusiastic, but I lost the ability to exercise. And within 6 weeks, my running performance went back 20 years. I went back to a 40-year-old. And I didn't realize it.
So what age were you when you began eating this way?
I eat 61. Yeah, I was 61.
So it's only, what, 9
years
ago?
now. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I know myself, when I'm eating carbs, and because I travel a lot, it's
Yeah.
very hard, particularly you go to places like India where it's all rice and stuff. I have no energy.
Yeah.
When I don't eat carbs, I have a set of stairs outside my place. I bound up those stairs with the dog.
Yeah.
They have so much energy.
That's right.
It's just remarkable.
Exactly right.
And not having that bloated feeling when you've eaten is just wonderful.
And always wanting to eat again to give you a lift. And because the glucose will give you a lift, because it's a brain stimulant. The carbohydrates stimulate your brain, and there you feel good for a few hours, and then you get the dip again, and you have to eat again.
One final quick question. People say that it's expensive to live on a low-carb, high-fat diet, and certainly carbs are very cheap. Talk to us about that.
Well, you're quite right. It is an expensive diet if you're going to eat steak and eggs and bacon and nuts. Lots of nuts in this country are very expensive. But we in South Africa have a problem that the poorest people eat the worst diet. So we developed, at my foundation, the Noakes Foundation, started the Eat Better South Africa campaign. That's not eat perfectly, it's eat better. And so, for example, we won't ask these people to eat expensive nuts, but peanuts are really good. They're a bit too high in carbohydrate, but they're good for protein. And we developed a diet for 30 Rand, which is $3 Australian a day.
Yeah.
And people get healthy on that diet. And the diet focuses on eggs, dairy produce, full cream, obviously, pilchards, which are relatively cheap in this country, and offal, i.e. liver, pancreas, kidneys, and intestine.
And people are getting healthy.
And they're getting healthy dramatically. So, and of course, vegetables as well. Vegetables are not that expensive in South Africa, in the townships. So on that diet, for 30 Rand a day, we can reverse these diseases, and it's just exciting to see people.
That's amazing.
Get better, and they no longer get their party pack. They go to the hospitals, and they get all their medications, and they say, you know, Dr. Noakes, I no longer need those medications. It's fantastic.
Tim, thank you so much for doing what you do. Thank you for being a courageous scientist and getting out there and changing lives.
My privilege. Thank you for what you're doing as well for the world.
Thank you. Well, that's Professor Tim Noakes. If you'd like to know more, the noakesfoundation.org. And another website that I personally use a lot is dietdoctor.com. In fact, they're saying dietdoctor.com is sending Weight Watchers broke in the USA because people are discovering amazing recipes and a lot of education as well. The noakesfoundation.org and dietdoctor.com. I'm Bernie Diamond, Professor Tim Noakes in Cape Town, South Africa.
This is your game changer. Break the cycle.